Hello and welcome to GryphonArt, and this week I'm returning to the A5 Milk Carton template because there's still a number of variations on this template that I want to share with you, simply to give you a wider range of different box sizes along this style. If you're not already aware, this template is available for download from my website at gryphonart.co.uk, and I will be putting a link to that document in the description area for this video, just so that it's more easily accessible for you. So just as a quick recap, if you were to make up that A5 milk carton template in the conventional way, this is the size carton that you would end up with. It's got a base that's 2 inches square and is a nice container for something like a candle votive, or maybe some nail varnish, a small bottle of perfume, things that are of that kind of size. So a couple of weeks ago I showed you how to manipulate that A5 milk carton template in order to double the size of the original box and make a carton that was double the width of the original. Now today I'm going to show you how to manipulate that carton in a slightly different way in order to produce a carton that's still got the 2-inch depth to it, but is actually 3 times the width of the original box. So that's actually what we're going to be working on today. So before we get started with the scoring, I would like to point out that I am going to be fulfilling another promise to you today, and that is to show you some different methods of closing these milk cartons. And I've recently come up with this button and ribbon design closure, which I'll also be sharing with you later. So in order to get started, we're going to take our piece of A5 card and put it in landscape mode. So that's a card size of 8 1/4 inches by 5 7/8 of an inch, and we're going to score at the 2-inch mark, which is exactly what we would do for the A5 milk carton. We're scoring on the wrong side of the card, by the way. So that score line has provided us with the 2-inch depth of our box, and we now need 6 inches for the width of our box, and that means that we're going to score at the 8-inch mark, which again is a score line for the A5 milk carton. So all we've actually done here is omit some of the score lines that we would have traditionally put in with the original template, and from this point forward all the score lines that we make are exactly the same as we would make if we were making that original carton. So what we're going to do now is turn this card anti-clockwise so that it becomes in portrait mode, and we're going to score at 3/8 of an inch, 1 7/8 of an inch, and 4 5/8 of an inch. And now I can just turn that back into landscape mode and mark this 1-inch point to that first score line, which is going to give me the indicating mark for these diagonal lines as well. Now for this box style we do actually need 2 pieces of card scored exactly the same, and I've already done a second one off camera to save time, and that means I can now clear away my Martha Stewart scoreboard and I'll come back to you when that's sorted. So the next thing we're going to do is just turn our card over to the right side for the remaining score lines, which I've always found were easier to do with just my Self-Heal mat and a bone folder along with a steel ruler. Now you do need to be able to see your existing score lines in order to make these marks, which are actually traveling from that little inch in the first panel, that little tiny 3/8 of an inch marker to each corner. So that's what we're doing now. And if you can't see these lines very easily, then if you fold and crease them, then they'll become more apparent on the right side of your card, and that will help you to locate them. So having done that, I'm now in a position to fold and crease all my card. So very quickly I am just going to get on with that, and as I've said before, I use my fold and crease lines rather than the edge of my card to line up my fold lines, just so that I know that the box will be square. You just need to bear in mind that when you purchase card, it isn't always square. So I've just got these little end ones to do. Now I am pushing ahead with this box. If there's not enough detail in this for you, then you might like to watch the video on the original A5 carton. I'm just wary of giving you a load of information that you're already aware of because you've watched my other videos. So with all the folds in place, I can now go ahead and remove this little corner, which we know is not required. That helps to create that large flap. So get rid of that one. And then I'm also going to create the flaps on these two sections by cutting up to that first score line from the bottom. So there you can see you've got one end and one side to your box already prepared. So the first thing that we need to do is to get our full length of card that we require. So I'd already folded another section of card to save time, and I'm going to just join these together with a little bit of double-sided tape that I've already placed there. So I do like to do dry runs. You're probably aware of that if you've been watching my other videos. So having done that, I can now just join those two pieces together. And do concern yourself mainly with this section, the main body of your box. This can normally be rectified if there's a slight discrepancy in these fold lines. It's much less easier if these are out of place. So that's just a bit of a tip for you. So we now have the full length of card that is required for us to assemble our box. And if you were going to leave the box plain or put on bulky embellishments, then that's exactly what you do at this stage. Apply your double-sided tape or chosen form of adhesion and put your box together, and moving on to your closure. Now in this case, because my embellishments are very flat and don't protrude from the sides of the box, it's going to be a lot easier for me to put them on the box whilst the card is very flat, and so that's what I'm going to work on next. So let's just take a quick look at these embellishments in case you're interested in duplicating them yourself. Now I will be including details of the die cuts that I've used for you in the description area for this video. So I don't want you to think that you need to be making notes now, so don't worry about that. What I will just say though is that I've used my Spellbinders die cuts, the circles from the Nestabilities range, and I've just taken 3 of those circles that increment consecutively, and I've started with the 1 3/8 of an inch, moving through the 1 7/8 of an inch to the 2 3/8 of an inch circle. So those are the circle sizes that we have here. So all I've actually done is I've taken just 2 of the die cuts that are of consecutive sizes and passed them through my die cutter together in order to create, in this case, the larger ring, and then swapped out the large one for the smaller ring or circle to do the same thing for these smaller gingham rings. So that's how that's been done, and then in the normal way I've just stamped out the circles in that instance. So that's all that's required there. So if we just take a look at how we're arranging those circles, it probably looks more complex than it is. So I'm just going to run through and show you how it works. Basically, I'm concerning myself with the circles and not the rings in the first instance. So we're just overlapping them, working from right to left. And then we're working back the other way with our rings, working from left to right and positioning them. So that is giving us our basic design. Now the only difficulty that I experienced was trying to line up this design. And actually we're concerned with not with the rings to start with, we just want our circles. And the problem was trying to get these areas even, and you've got different size circles, so it wasn't easy to line them up. So you may not struggle with it, it depends on a person's eye, but in case you have the same difficulties that I have, just move those out of the way for a minute. I actually made myself a template which was equivalent to this area of my box, and because we're only concerned with positioning those circles, I could very easily just put them in place within that area and know that I was going to line them up. So I think that even though that's going to take a little bit of time, I will just demonstrate that for you. So I've already put some double-sided tape on the back of my circles just to save a bit of time off camera, and I'm now going to just apply that customary PVA glue as a double measure so that I can reach all these edges, and be assured actually that the embellishment will remain stuck to the box in the worst conditions. Just remove that tape backing. So just make sure that this template is where I want it to be positioned. And then I'm just going to place that inside that space where it needs to go. I can make sure that it's not gluing itself to the template as well. So that's the first one, and I just move on in the same way. Take the backing tape off again. Just double check that template in case it's shifted, and then see, you probably can begin to get the picture. Make sure it's not sticking. There we go. Let me just do the last one then. I've actually used some card was from a pretty box, so that's why you've got just an ordinary box that contained tea bags actually, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, and it's such a nice pattern. So that's why you've got some strange object on the back of it. But waste not, want not was what my mother always used to say to me as a child. And there we go, just double check that hasn't shifted, although the more circles you get in, the less likely it is that that will happen. Actually, turn that around a bit. And that's our last one. So that lines things up quite nicely, and now from this point forward you'll see it's quite easy. So I will do a couple of the rings just to show you how that works. No double-sided tape in this case. And then once I've done that, I'll do the rest off camera, so I'm not taking up any more of your precious time than is absolutely necessary. So just as a reminder, we worked from right to left with the full circles, and we're working from left to right, and now we can use those circles so that we know where to position our rings. I just use my bone folder just to get in these corners here where the overlap occurs. That's one. Now it actually makes quite a bit of difference once you start to get these rings on. Just the contrast to the circles adds something, I think, but it is always a matter of opinion. Reminds me of Jack Sprat and his wife. One could eat no fat, the other could eat no lean, and they worked well together. So it's not always good for us all to like the same things. And there we just layer that one up as well. You can see how easy, she says, as it slides in the glue, it is to position them once those first circles are in place. So that's your main worry really, is once you've lined up those circles you can steam on ahead. So, and that's what I'm going to do now off camera. So I'll get this final ring in and I'll do the embellishments exactly the same on this side, and then I'll come back to you at that point. So that's all our embellishments applied to our box now. And if you've been doing any of the other milk cartons with me, then you'll know that ordinarily at this point I would then assemble my box. However, because we're using a different form of closure today, this new style of button and ribbon closure, I have tried it both ways, so you can fit it after you've assembled the box, but my preference is to assemble it at this stage. So we're going to have a look at that closure next. So let's take a closer look at this closure to start with. And you can see that it consists of ribbon, and if I just untie that for you, both ends, where's that going? There we go. It just winds around these ribbons, I hope you can see that, on opposite side like a lace, and it's actually attached underneath at this end. Just show you that. So we can open our carton up. So I'm hoping that you can more clearly see you've got your button, your ribbon underneath there, and you've got a strip that's been attached to the sides of the carton to contain those buttons. Now I will say that if you're in a rush, you've left a gift till the last minute, then this is probably not the closure for that occasion, because it does take a little time. But for something a little unusual and pretty, it's probably worth knowing of this option for when you've got a little bit of time to do some craft work. So I'm just going to clear the decks for a moment because we don't need this box just for the minute. And if I bring in the components, then you can see more clearly perhaps how this has been formed. Now, I don't think I need to show you how to sew on buttons, but I will walk you through how we've got to this stage. So for each closure, let's move those actually, I've used 3 strips of card, 3/8 of an inch wide and 6 inches long, because the length of our, or width of our box is 6 inches. So that's the length that we're working with. So if you were using a longer box, then you might want to extend that. But for this particular box, we need to be dealing with strips of card that are 6 inches in length and 3/8 of an inch wide. And the buttons that you're choosing don't really want to protrude beyond the width of that 3/8 of an inch strip. So just bear that in mind. Now, the first thing I needed to do with that 6-inch strip was to mark out for my buttons and sew on my buttons. So that's phase 1. So let's take a quick look at that. So the first thing that I needed to do was to create the intervals for the buttons. Now this is provided for you within that template document, and the quickest way probably to show you is here. So across the 6-inch width, I've just got 1/4 of an inch, 2 1/8 of an inch, 3 7/8 of an inch, and then 5 3/4 inches. And I've just drawn lines on a scrap piece of card to use again as a template, and that enables you to be consistent on both sides of your box, because the buttons need to coincide opposite each other on the box as much as possible. So having achieved my template, I then transferred those points to a strip of card using one of my buttons, just placing the strip on the card, and then I've put a piece of cork at the back in order to help me produce a hole in the card. There's less resistance. And then I've just pushed a pin, a decent pin I found with a rounded head, hurt the tip of my finger less, into each of the buttonholes in order that I knew where to position those buttons on that strip. So this is a bit misleading actually, because the buttons obviously at that point weren't on the strip of card, so they would have been behind it. So I hope you can, I think you can probably tell exactly what I mean. But actually, just in case you're not sure, I've got a spare button here, so I'll just use this strip as an example. So I'll pop that on my cork board and then place my guide over the top of it so it lines up where I know I need it to line up. Once you've got the first set of pinholes in it, you can reuse them, but for the very first time, when they're not there, you just position your button so it's central over the line that's been drawn, and you just then push through the buttonholes with the pin to form those pinholes. And from that point forward, once you've got them, as I say, as is the case here, you would just use them to create, let's do that actually, just to help you. I'll do a couple. You can run all the way across the strip. Just make sure they went in all right. I don't think they went in. I have to move that because my cork is a little bit short. There we go. And then I hope you can see that you can see where you need to then sew your buttons on the strip there. So that's how you achieve that first phase, which once you've finished your sewing, you'll end up with something like that. And I actually use a very long piece of thread so that I didn't have to keep having lots of loose ends, and they'll get glued down, as you'll see later. Okay, so once you've got your buttons sewn on, I'm just going to have a bit of a tidy up here. Just complicates things when there's too much lying around. You need to then take a length of ribbon. I've used 3mm satin ribbon. You could probably use things like baker's twine, you know, different things. As long as it will wind around the buttons and it's not too bulky, it will be fine. And you've got a method of attaching it to the strip. So I hope that you can see that all I've done is taken that length, and I've used a length that's 14 inches, and that will need trimming back, but it's just, you know, I'd rather have a piece that's too long than too short. So 14 inches in length is perfectly sufficient. And I've just attached that a little way in to line up with where the button's positioned on the end of a second strip of card that is the same size, so 3/8 of an inch by 6 inches. Okay, so that's the second thing you need to do. Once you've reached that point, you can then glue these two sections of card together, and I'm going to do that now. Get a little bit of glue. So I'm using PVA again, but that's just my adhesion of choice, as you will probably have learned by now. So please use what suits you. I put quite a bit on actually, because my feeling is that this closure could come under some quite a lot of pulling and tugging with the ribbon, so I want to make sure it's not going to come apart. Just spread it along the length. Oop. Not what I wanted to do. And that's a chance to glue down those extra bits of cotton as well, so that they don't stick out from the side of the closure. Right. Just get rid of that excess glue so it doesn't go everywhere. So it's just then a question of lining these up This one's slightly thinner actually, but it doesn't matter too much. I suspect the third one that goes down will be thicker again. I'm normally a perfectionist, but if it doesn't bother me, then it probably won't bother you either, hopefully. So once that's more or less in the place that you want it, what I then find is it's useful to use a bone folder, because you can get underneath the buttons with that, or paper creaser if it's the plastic equivalent, and that just makes sure, because you do want those two strips to adhere to each other very well and become as one laminated section of card, really. That's what's going to give it its strength. So, and what I tend to do is just check around the edge, because normally you can see if there's an area of a gap where it hasn't joined very well and requires some more pressure. So I just keep checking that until I'm happy that I have a join all the way around. Yeah, so that's fine. Now, what I will say is that it depends on the thickness of card that you've got, and as to whether you leave it at that. I tend to go a step further then and glue a third piece in exactly the same way to the back of that, just to give me a much thicker band and a much sturdier, stronger section. But I will leave that up to you, because it's definitely a matter of choice, and it also depends on how thick your card is. You know, there are some cards out there, some cards that I've got that are actually thicker than this card, and probably in that instance I would feel that 2 layers is more than enough for this particular closure. But that, you know, that is up to you. So once you've done that, you want to produce the same again, with the only exception that the ribbon is traveling in the opposite direction. So as long as you've got this scenario where one section of ribbon is traveling northwards, if you like, and another southwards, you're absolutely fine, and we're ready to put that on the box. So I am going to just demonstrate attaching one of these closures for you. It is fairly straightforward, but there are a couple of things that just might be worthy of making you aware of. So the first thing to note is that in positioning this strip, for whatever reason, I have preferred this ribbon to be traveling down the side of the box. And the only reason that I can attribute to that is because when I first start to close this box, in order to get a really tight grip at this end, I like to take the ribbon around the end of the box and pass it underneath the opposite button. So I'm not saying that that's the right way or not, but that's certainly what I do. So you may evolve this method over time, but that's just to demonstrate the way that I do it, and that's the way I'm going to show you. Now I am going to be using PVA glue again to fit this strip to my box, but because the 3/8 of an inch strip can sometimes sit, when it sits on that fold line, it can actually sometimes sit above the top of the box. Rather than applying the PVA to the strip, I apply it to the box instead. So I'm just going to quickly do that. There's quite a bit of glue once again, but I just feel that it gives the closure a bit more strength. So there, that's ready to roll. So all I'm going to do now is take that strip and place it where it's on these folds for the corners of the box, and also on the 3/8 of an inch line, so that it sits nice and neatly. Because the glue takes a while to go off, it doesn't always adhere first time round, but that's not a bad thing, because it gives you a chance to make any adjustments. So this is really the same process that you used before when you were applying the 2 layers of card to that button strip. Just going round underneath the buttons with the bone folder, just to make sure it's got adhesion all the way along the length. That. Now, so once you've achieved that, the only other thing to make sure, and it should naturally fall into place because otherwise the ribbon would be traveling in the wrong direction, that when you apply it to the other side, that the ribbon is traveling downwards, so it's going to be opposite. So I'm going to do that off camera to save time, and then I'll come back to you so that we can assemble the box. Right, so that's both of my button strips attached to my box, and I have allowed the glue some time to go off, so we are now ready to assemble the box. Now you can probably see that I've applied my double-sided tape in the interest of your time, but I would just like to say that if you are familiar with the standard A5 carton template, there is a difference with where you're placing your double-sided tape or other form of adhesion. On the standard template, it does instruct that you place most of your tape on the inside of your box, and clearly that isn't the case here. So you do want double-sided tape on the outside of your box, on the end flap, the joining flap, which is the same as for the standard carton. And ordinarily then you would place the tape on the outside of your box for the opposite little flap to this end one. So that still remains the same, but the rest with the standard carton would be on the other side of your box. So I just want you to be aware of that in case you gallop ahead and think that you're doing what's required. And I will give you a couple of pointers to watch out for. So first of all, if we take a look at the bottom of the box, we can see that these little flaps actually disappear underneath these longer ones. So you can actually place full adhesion on these little flaps, because that's going to help your box stay intact despite what weight you may put in it. So make full use of those flaps for adhesion. The other thing to note is that, I don't know whether you can see it very well, but actually that's the amount of overlap that you've got on these bottom flaps. It's very little. So whatever adhesion you use for these long flaps needs to be placed on the edge on both sides. So that's, you can see how close to the edge it is there, and I've mimicked it on this side here. So that's something else to bear in mind. Now the only remaining guidance that I can think to give you is one I use myself actually. In this case, there isn't a front or back to the box particularly, because we've got a join here and we're going to have a similar join on the other side of our box. So there's no real difference between this panel to make us be able to identify one or other as being the front. So you can pick and choose on that. But as a general rule of thumb, for sticking the adhesion to this box ready for assembly, make up your mind as to which one you're going to use as your front panel and put the adhesion on the inside of the box. The adhesion then for all the rest of these little flaps goes on the outside, as does the end panel. So that's the only guidance that I can really give you, and I hope it helps. So we may as well go ahead now and assemble our box, and even though it does take a little bit of time, I think I'm going to go ahead and do that on camera so that you can see it in case you've missed any of the other boxes. So dry run first to make sure everything's lining up all right, and then just removing any backing tape. Now actually in this case, suddenly notice that the double-sided tape is wider than that flap. So the first thing I'm going to do is fold it back on itself, because otherwise that will remain on the inside of my box and it'll make it sticky inside, and I don't want that. So that's fine, it'll stick back on itself. And then it isn't quite as easy with these closures on as without them on, because it provides a stiffness to the box, but once you've sorted it out, it goes into place fine. So again, just concern yourself with this main body of the box. Once that's sorted, the rest of it generally just slots into place, and you can use a bone folder or something that can apply some pressure just to put the rest in place. So the next thing we're going to deal with are these end flaps and the back of the box, which takes a bit of working out now. So I'll fold that one out of the way. I'm going to put some glue on both of these end flaps because it's certainly easier to deal with them as a pair for gluing purposes. So, oh, seems to be paper or something off the tape back in there. It'll be all right. Could do with a bit more glue, I think. There we are. That one ready to go. Just get this one to the same point. There we are. Now I'm just going to remove this backing tape if I can. There we go. Now, if you haven't been watching my videos, I will just say the reason why I prefer a combination of double-sided tape and glue, and I'm sorry if you've heard me say this several times before, is because I find to use all PVA glue, which is quite a strong glue, it not only takes time to go off, but absorbs into the card and can make it curl. The double-sided tape not only grabs instantly or fairly instantly, but also acts as a brace, so it sort of counteracts that curl. So that's why I use that combination. So I'm just going to fold these flaps down in a way that hopefully you can see. I normally work the other way around, but never mind, I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So if I square that up as much as I can on both ends, put the flap down, then I can reach inside the box and apply some pressure at this stage because there's that space there. So now I'm not using any glue in this instance anymore. All the PVA I'm using has been applied. So just a case of removing the backing tape from the double-sided tape, and on these two things you can probably gather that they will overlap each other. This tape will probably stick to that tape, but you know. So now squaring that up again, applying a bit of pressure, and at that point flip the box over and apply some pressure on the inside just to make sure that that glue and double-sided tape is making contact on the edge of those panels. And there we are, that's the box ready. Just need to sort out the closure. Right, so you may find your own method for lacing these up. We don't all tie our shoelaces in the same way, but this is the method that I employ, and it's you know, up to you to decide whether you want to follow suit. So ordinarily, the first thing that I would do is to take the ribbon around the end of the box to the opposite side of the box and underneath that other ribbon. And that just reassures me that I've got a stronger grip on that end. And then it's just a case of going underneath the ribbon, the buttons on one side, over the top of the box, underneath the button on the other side. And it depends how tightly. I always sew my buttons on quite tightly, so you know, when the box is first new, they may not go under as easily, but with use that will change. So when I get to the end here, I wrap the ribbon completely round that end button, and so I've got to that point, and I do the same with the other piece of ribbon. So we go around the end of the box, underneath the first button, then over the top of the box, and just continue in that way underneath the buttons on both sides. And then when you get to the end, completely round the end button. And then I like to go across the back of the end of the box and around I go underneath that button on that side as well, and over the top. Now you could tie a ribbon, a little bow at this end, that would be absolutely fine, but what I tend to do, so I'm now going back to the other side and going around. Now instead of tying a bow, I actually like to quite form it like a little loop, so that this ribbon is trapped underneath it. It does take a little bit more of undoing, that's the only trouble, so it depends who you're giving this to. And then I can put that around there. I hope you can see how that ribbon is trapped, and just pull, and it creates a nice little end section here. Now you can see that those ribbons are long, so I can just trim them back at this stage. Now you could put beads or something on the end of these ribbons, because they wouldn't inhibit the opening and closing of it, and they would add some weight if you were to create a little bow as well. So there's room for further design and creativity here. And if in putting these over they're not quite central, you can move the ribbon around at this point if you want to be pedantic about their positioning. But that's basically it. So that's how that closure works. I hope you like it. So I will just show you the other boxes, because it's quite surprising how when they're made up in different colorways, how different they can end up looking. So we've got a blue one there. I've got a pink one here with slightly larger buttons, clearer buttons, and a white ribbon. And then I've used this one in the demonstration as well. We've got a little purpley one as well. So 4 in total. So that's basically the A5 triple width milk carton. I hope that that video has been of some interest to you, and that you're inspired by the button closure. Next week I will be introducing you to another variation on the A5 milk carton template, which incidentally, don't forget, you can download from my website at GryphonArt.co.uk. Now if you are interested in further variations on this template, please don't hesitate to subscribe to my GryphonArt channel on YouTube so that you'll be notified of when they're published. In the interim, thank you for your time today.